A gas station. Blue Ridge Mountains. The sign is dark. Inside, by the dim light of a single hanging bulb, a woman kneels behind the counter. 58 years old. Her hands are bleeding. Her fingernails are torn. A wooden panel sits against the wall beside her, splintered, pried loose from a hole her father carved by hand decades ago. She does not know what is inside yet, but she will. Outside, a Range Rover is coming up the mountain, headlights cutting through the trees, a woman in white silk gripping the steering wheel, a phone pressed to her ear, a smile that does not reach her eyes. The valley has waited 12 years for this night, and 40 years of secrets are about to come due. The smell hit her first, not the dust, not the mildew, something underneath, motor oil, pipe tobacco, 40 years of mornings. Margaret Hayes was on her knees behind a counter she hadn't seen in 12 years. Her hands were shaking, her fingernails were torn. The wood panel she just pried loose sat against the wall beside her, splintered along one edge, and inside the cavity her father had carved into the wall by hand. 3 things waited: a leather journal soft from being held, a metal lockbox, a bundle of envelopes tied with kitchen twine. Margaret reached for the journal first. Her fingers wouldn't stop trembling. She didn't know yet what she was about to read. She didn't know that the man she buried 12 years ago had spent 4 decades doing something no one in the family had ever known about. She didn't know that the gas station her ex-husband's lawyer had dismissed as a teardown was about to become the most valuable inheritance any woman in Goshen County had ever received. She didn't know any of that, not yet, but she would. 6 hours earlier, Margaret Hayes had a different name. The courtroom in Roanoke smelled like floor polish and stale air, and the slow rot of 33 years of marriage. Margaret sat in a wooden chair too small for an adult. Her knees were pressed together. Her hands were folded in her lap. The judge was speaking into a microphone that made his voice sound like it was coming through a tin can buried inside a wall. Howard wasn't there. Howard had sent his lawyer. A man named Felton in a charcoal suit that fit him too well kept checking his watch like he had somewhere better to be, which he did. He always did. "Mrs. Caldwell," Felton said. His pen tapped twice on the table. "Please initial here." Margaret initialed. "And here," she initialed. "And sign at the bottom." She signed. 33 years, 4 signatures, 2 initials. Her marriage was a stack of paper inside a manila folder now sliding back across the table toward her like something she was supposed to keep. Felton slid a second sheet across. "This is your asset schedule." She didn't pick it up. "Briar Creek property, primary vehicles, retirement accounts, and investment portfolio remain with Mr. Caldwell. You retain personal effects, the Ford pickup, and the real property located at Route 11, Goshen County." She read the words twice. The real property. That was what they were calling her father's gas station now. A building she hadn't seen since the day she'd locked its door after his funeral and driven away. Howard's lawyers had appraised it at $14,000 and let her keep it without an argument, like a tip you leave on a table. Margaret picked up the cardboard box from under her chair. Inside were the things Howard had left for her on the kitchen counter. A jewelry box her mother had given her in 1973, a photo album from Merritt's childhood, a coffee mug that said "World's Best, Mom," the rim chipped where she dropped it once making toast. 33 years. This is what fit in a box. She stood up. Felton didn't look at her. He was already on his phone. Margaret walked out of the courtroom alone. In the parking lot, she sat behind the wheel of the Ford pickup for a long time. The truck was a 2006 model, cracked dashboard, passenger door that stuck. Howard had bought it for a landscaper who'd quit after 2 weeks, and it had sat in their driveway until Margaret started using it for errands. When the divorce was final, Howard had told Felton she could have it. Generous? That was the word Felton used. Generous. Margaret pulled the deed out of the manila folder and stared at it. Hayes Gas and Service, Route 11, Goshen County, deeded to Margaret Ann Hayes per the last will and testament of Walter Robert Hayes, deceased. Her father had left her the station 12 years ago. She'd driven down for the funeral, spent 3 days sorting through his things, and then locked the door and never gone back. Howard had said the property wasn't worth the taxes, and Margaret hadn't argued. She never argued with Howard about money, about decisions, about anything. That was the deal. Nobody ever said it out loud. She had agreed. For 33 years. Margaret turned the key in the ignition. The engine caught on the third try, coughed, settled into a rough idle. She had nowhere to go, so she pointed the truck south, toward the mountains. The drive took 4 hours. Interstate gave way to 2-lane highway. Highway gave way to county road. County road gave way to Route 11, a ribbon of cracked asphalt that climbed into the Blue Ridge through tunnels of oak and hickory. The leaves were just starting to turn, edges of gold and copper bleeding through the green. Margaret cracked the window. Mountain air filled the cab, damp leaves, wood smoke, and underneath all of it, something older, rock, soil, time itself. She remembered this road from summers as a girl. Her mother would drop her off at the station in June and pick her up in August. 2 months with Walter learning to pump gas and make change and check oil levels. He taught her to read a tire tread, to listen to an engine and hear what was wrong inside it. She could change a fan belt by the time she was 12. Howard had thought that was charming. Once, when they were dating, he used to tell people at parties, "My fiancée knows her way around an engine, can you believe it?" Later, he stopped telling that story. Later, he found it embarrassing. A real estate developer's wife who knew her way around a carburetor. He never said she should stop. He just stopped asking about it. And eventually, she stopped doing it. That's how it works. You stop doing things the way you stop breathing certain kinds of air, quietly, without noticing, until one day you wake up and you can't remember the last time you smelled motor oil on your own hands. Route 11 climbed higher. She passed a few houses, a church with a gravel parking lot, a general store with a closed sign hanging crooked in the window. Then the road curved around a granite outcrop, and there it was, Hayes Gas and Service. The station was smaller than she remembered. A single-story cinder block building with a flat roof, 2 gas pump islands out front. The pumps were locked and rusted, their price displays frozen on numbers from another decade. Kudzu had crawled over the south wall and was reaching for the roof. The sign above the door had been hand-painted by Walter himself. Now it was ghosts of letters. One of the front windows had a crack running corner to corner, sealed with duct tape that had dried out and curled away from the glass years ago. But the building was standing. The walls were solid. The door, when Margaret tried it, was locked tight. She fished through the cardboard box until she found the ring of keys from the manila folder. Tried the first key. Didn't fit. Tried the second. The lock resisted, then turned with a gritty click. Margaret pushed the door open. Inside the air was still, thick with dust. Late afternoon light filtered through the dirty windows, casting pale rectangles across the concrete floor. A wooden counter ran along the back wall. Behind it, a pegboard hung with hooks that had once held snack bags and road maps. The cash register, the old mechanical kind with actual buttons, sat in the center of the counter. Its drawer was open a quarter inch, and beside the register, exactly where he'd left them, sat Walter's reading glasses, wire-rimmed, one temple slightly bent. Next to them, a folded newspaper open to the crossword puzzle. 27 across was filled in. 28 across was blank. Margaret stood in the doorway and didn't move. She thought she had finished crying weeks ago. She had cried in the guest bedroom on Briar Creek while Howard slept in the master suite with the door locked. She had cried in her car after lunch with women who pretended not to know what was happening. She had cried in the shower and on the phone with Merritt, and once in the produce aisle of the grocery store for no reason she could name. She thought she was done, but this was different. This wasn't crying. This was the absence of crying, a quiet so big it had its own weight. Walter had been gone 12 years, but his glasses were still here. The crossword was still unfinished, and the air smelled exactly like it had smelled when she was 9 years old, sitting on this same concrete floor, watching her father teach her how a carburetor worked. Margaret walked to the counter. She picked up the glasses, cleaned them with the hem of her shirt, a reflex from childhood when Walter would lose them 3 times in an afternoon, and she would find them and hand them back like a small daughter doing a small thing. She set them back down on the counter. The crossword stayed open. 28 across, still blank. Margaret climbed the stairs to the apartment above. It was cramped but intact. A bed with a bare mattress, a dresser, a small kitchen with a 2-burner stove, a refrigerator that hummed faintly when she plugged it in. The bathroom had a stand-up shower and a medicine cabinet, still stocked with Walter's toothbrush and a bottle of aspirin that had expired in 2016. She opened the window above the bed. Mountain air rushed in, pushed out the staleness. From up here, she could see Route 11 curving down the mountain. Beyond it, ridge lines layered in blue and gray, fading into the distance like watercolor that hadn't quite dried. Margaret sat on the mattress. The springs creaked under her weight. 58 years old, sitting in her dead father's apartment, above a closed gas station, on a road nobody used, with $200 in checking a cardboard box of broken things and no plan. She didn't cry. She'd done her crying. What she felt now was quieter than grief, emptier. She sat on the mattress until the light started fading. Then she went back downstairs. The station felt different in the dimness, less abandoned, more like something waiting. Margaret walked behind the counter and ran her hand along its surface. Decades of grooves and scratches and burn marks where someone had set down a hot cup of coffee without thinking. Her fingers found a seam in the wood paneling below the register. Not a crack, a seam, straight and deliberate. She knelt down. The panel was about 2 feet square, fitted flush against the wall, but not nailed. She worked her fingernails into the edge and pulled. It came away with a dry scrape, and inside the cavity, 3 things waited: a leather journal, a metal lockbox, a bundle of envelopes tied with kitchen twine. Margaret's hands were trembling now. She lifted the journal out first. The leather was worn smooth at the edges, darkened where fingers had gripped it thousands of times. She slid off the rubber band and opened to the first page. Walter's handwriting, small, neat, slanting slightly to the right. September 14th, 1981. Lent Tom Hendricks $200 for the electric bill. Wife is doing dialysis, and they can't afford to lose heat. Told him to pay when he can. He won't be able to. That's all right. Margaret turned the page. Fixed Carol Dunbar's transmission. Charged her $30 for parts. Nothing for labor. She's raising 3 kids alone since Ray left. The oldest boy helped me sweep the bay while she waited. Good kid, quiet, has his mother's eyes. Another page, another entry, and another. Page after page. Walter had kept a running account of every family in the valley, not their debts, their needs. He noted when children were born and when someone lost a job and when a roof needed patching and when a marriage was falling apart and when a man's drinking had gotten bad enough to cost him work. He tracked the loans some people paid back. He quietly forgave the ones they couldn't. Margaret sat on the floor behind the counter. She read by the last light coming through the dirty windows. She forgot to breathe. The lockbox held $412 in small bills, a set of keys she didn't recognize, and a folded document that turned out to be the original deed to the property passed down from her grandfather in 1971. The envelopes were harder. Her hand shook as she untied the twine. 8 envelopes, each addressed in different handwriting, all to Walter. Thank you notes, one from a woman named Linda whose family would have lost their farm without Walter's help, one from a man named Curtis who said Walter's $50 loan had gotten him through the worst month of his life. Simple letters, notebook paper, the backs of receipts, expressing gratitude for acts of generosity Walter had never spoken about, not to his customers, not to his neighbors, not even to his own daughter. Margaret read every one of them. Then she went back to the journal. The last quarter of the book covered the final years of Walter's life. The handwriting was shakier, the amounts were smaller, but the entries kept coming. Walter was still lending, still fixing, still helping, right up until the month before he died. And then she found an entry dated 3 years before his death. Her own name, Margaret called today, sounded tired. That husband of hers is spending again. New car, new suit, always something new. She says she's fine, but she's not fine. I can hear it in her voice, the way she talks around things instead of about them. She gets that from me, I suppose. Stubborn like her mother. I wish she'd come home. I wish she'd come home and let me teach her to change oil again and drink coffee that's too strong and sit on the porch and watch the trucks go by. But she won't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I just hope she knows the door is open. Margaret closed the journal. She pressed it against her chest, and then she did something she hadn't done since the day she turned 12. She cried for her father, not the polite, controlled tears of an adult woman, not the dignified grief of someone who has practiced grief in waiting rooms. She cried like a child, out loud, on the floor of a gas station on a mountain road nobody used anymore. Walter had known. He had known about Howard, about the money, about the slow erasure of his daughter. He had known, and he had said nothing. He had written it down in a book nobody would read, and he had kept his door open, and he had waited, and she had not come. For 3 more years she had not come, and then he had died, and she had locked the door and driven away, and let her husband tell her the property wasn't worth the taxes. Margaret cried until her throat hurt. Then she sat very still in the dark. Through the window she could see stars appearing above the ridgeline, more stars than she had seen in decades of suburban living. The mountain was utterly quiet. She sat there holding the record of a life lived in service to other people, and understood for the first time that Walter Hayes had not just been pumping gas for 40 years. He had been holding an entire valley together with his bare hands, one small kindness at a time, and he had never said a word about it. She didn't sleep on the mattress. She slept on the floor behind the counter with the journal open beside her like a pillow she was afraid to lose. When she woke up, Birds were singing. The light coming through the windows was pale and gold. She didn't know what time it was. Her phone had died. The wall clock had stopped working sometime in 2013. Margaret stood up slowly. Her back hurt. Her neck hurt. Her hands still had small cuts on them from the splintered wood panel. She washed her face in the upstairs sink. There was no hot water. The cold water tasted like copper and mountain stone. In the small kitchen, she found a can of coffee in the cabinet, still sealed. She smelled it, stale but not ruined. The two-burner stove worked on the second try, and she heated water in a dented saucepan because there was no kettle. She carried her coffee downstairs, and that was when she heard tires on gravel. Margaret looked up. Through the window, she saw an old Chevy truck pulling up to the lot. A man climbed out, heavy-set, slow, wearing a plaid flannel shirt and a cap with a feed store logo. He stood in front of the building, hands on his hips, staring. Margaret opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. "Morning," she said. The man turned. His face was deeply lined, sun-darkened, white stubble along his jaw. He squinted at her. Then his expression changed. His eyes widened. He took off his cap. "I'll be damned. You're Walter's girl." Margaret nodded. "Bud Whitaker," the man said, extending a thick, rough-fingered hand. "I live 2 miles down the mountain. Your daddy and I played cards every Thursday for I don't know how long." "I remember. You used to bring corn from your garden." Bud grinned. "Still do, though there's nobody to bring it to anymore." He looked at the station, then at her. "What brings you up here? Haven't seen a soul at this place since Walter passed." Margaret considered how to answer. She could have said she was assessing the property for sale. She could have deflected with something polite and vague. She could have lied to a stranger about her life the way she had been lying to herself for years. Instead, she told the truth. "My husband divorced me. He got the house and everything in it. This is all I have left." Bud nodded slowly. He didn't offer sympathy. He didn't ask questions. He didn't look surprised. He just walked back to his truck and returned with a thermos and 2 ceramic mugs. "Well then," he said, pouring coffee, "you'll need good coffee, not whatever ancient can you found in Walter's cabinet." He handed her a mug. She drank. It was strong and hot and better than anything she'd tasted in months. They sat on overturned buckets on the cracked concrete apron in front of the station, drinking Bud's coffee, watching the sun finish climbing over the ridge. "Tell me about him," Margaret said. "Tell me the things he didn't tell me." Bud sipped his coffee, studied the mountains. "Your daddy was a complicated man in a simple way. Worked hard, kept his head down, didn't talk much about himself, but he had a thing about people. Couldn't stand to see someone struggle if he could do something about it. I found his journal behind the counter." Bud's eyebrows rose. He wrote it down. Everything. Every family he helped. Every loan. Every repair he did for free. Bud shook his head, smiling. "That stubborn fool. Never told a living soul what he was doing. I only knew because I caught him once loading groceries into the Sutter family's truck at midnight. He told me he was reorganizing inventory." Bud laughed. "Reorganizing it right into their back seat." Margaret laughed too. It surprised her. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like that. Sudden, unguarded, real. "Your daddy never turned away a soul who needed help," Bud said. "Said it was cheaper than church and did more good." He paused, turned the mug in his hands. "Folks around here still talk about him. Not big speeches, just quiet things. Someone will mention that their lights stayed on because of Walter, or that their car ran another winter because Walter fixed it for nothing, or that their kid got through community college because somebody anonymous paid the textbook fees." Margaret looked at him. Why didn't he tell me any of this? Bud met her eyes. You know why? She waited. Because Walter didn't think it was anything special. He thought it was just what you did when you lived somewhere and had 2 hands and a set of wrenches. He didn't think it needed a name or a medal or a conversation. He just did it. They sat in silence for a while. A truck passed on Route 11, the first vehicle Margaret had seen since arriving. The driver lifted 2 fingers from the steering wheel in the mountain greeting she'd forgotten about. Walter Hayes died owing nothing to anyone, Bud said quietly, and being owed by everyone. That was the richest a man could be. Bud left mid-morning, promised to come back the next day with lumber for the porch railing, which he said was about to fall off the building from rot, and which Margaret had not asked him to fix, and which he was going to fix anyway, because that was how things worked up here. Margaret spent the rest of the morning cleaning. She swept the main room, washed the windows with newspaper and vinegar she found under the sink, scrubbed the counter until the wood grain showed through decades of grime. At noon, a woman she didn't recognize pulled up in a minivan and left a casserole on the front step with a handwritten note that said, "Welcome home, Walter's daughter." Margaret didn't know who she was or how she knew Margaret was here. Mountain news traveled without wires. By afternoon, 3 more people had stopped by. An elderly man left a stack of firewood by the side of the building. A couple brought cleaning supplies in a plastic bin. A teenage girl dropped off a bag of groceries, waved shyly and drove away before Margaret could thank her. Each one left the same message in different words. Walter helped us once. We're glad you're here. Margaret carried the groceries upstairs and put them away. Bread, eggs, milk, canned soup, a bag of apples that were just on the edge of overripe. She made herself a sandwich, ate it standing at the apartment window, looking down at the gas pumps. They were rusted, locked, the hoses cracked, the price displays frozen on dollar amounts from another decade. Getting them working again would cost money she didn't have, but the repair bay was functional. The tools were all there, and she was Walter's daughter, which meant she knew her way around an engine, even if she hadn't touched one in decades. She went back downstairs and spent the afternoon in the bay, testing the hydraulic lift, checking the air compressor, organizing tools. Her hands remembered what her mind had tried to forget: the weight of a socket wrench, the resistance of a rusted bolt, the satisfaction of hearing a stuck mechanism break free. Late in the afternoon, with the sun starting to drop behind the western ridge, Margaret heard an engine struggling on the road. She stepped outside. A white pickup truck was limping toward the station. Steam was rising from under the hood. It rolled to a stop 20 yards past the building. A young man climbed out, maybe 23, lean, sunburned, wearing a gray t-shirt with grease stains on the front. His jeans were torn at the knee. His boots were work-worn. He popped the hood, stared at the engine with the focused expression of someone who understood what he was looking at. Margaret walked over. Radiator. The young man looked up, surprised. Upper hose, blue on the climb. You got a spare? In the bed. She nodded toward the bay. Pull it in. I've got tools. He looked at her, then at the station. His face showed the calculation of someone used to being turned away, the hesitation of a person who'd learned not to accept help because it always came with conditions. I can pay for the bay time. I didn't ask for money. He looked at her again. I said pull it in. His name was Tobias Reed. Toby. He drove the truck into the bay, had the old hose off in 6 minutes. Margaret found a replacement in Walter's stockroom that was close enough to work with a couple of extra clamps. She watched Toby install it. His hands moved with the quick, precise confidence of someone who had been working on engines since childhood. Where'd you learn to wrench? My grandmother's boyfriend had a shop in Boone. I spent every summer there until I was 16. He tightened the last clamp, stepped back. Haven't worked in a shop since. Last 3 places I tried didn't work out. Margaret didn't ask why. She could see enough in his face to fill in the story. Young, no family support, probably sleeping in the truck, the kind of person Walter would have noticed immediately. I'm reopening this station, she said. The words came out before she'd fully decided they were true. I need someone who can turn a wrench. Toby looked at her steadily. You don't know me. I know you replaced that hose faster than most mechanics with twice your experience. That's enough for today. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He poured coolant into the radiator, started the engine, listened to it run. Satisfied, he closed the hood and wiped his hands on a rag from Walter's workbench. I'll think about it. Come back tomorrow if you decide. I'll have coffee on. Toby drove off down Route 11. Margaret watched his taillights disappear around the curve. Then she went back inside. The station was quiet again. She sat behind the counter with the journal and the bundle of letters she hadn't finished reading. She untied the twine and sorted through the remaining envelopes. Most were the same thank you notes from families Walter had helped, but the last envelope was different. It was sealed, not opened, addressed in Walter's handwriting, and it had her name on it, Margaret. That was all it said. In the careful block letters that filled the crossword puzzles in the journal and labeled every tool on the wall in the bay, Margaret slid her finger under the flap, pulled out 2 sheets of yellow legal paper folded in thirds. Dear Margaret, it began. If you're reading this, you found your way back. I always knew you would. She leaned against the counter and held the letter up to the last of the afternoon light. I wrote this on a Tuesday in October. The leaves are turning and business is slow, which means I have too much time to think. That's dangerous for an old man. I want you to know something about this station. It isn't worth much on paper. A building inspector would condemn half of it, and a real estate agent would call it a tear down. But it's worth everything to the people who depend on it. I don't mean the gas or the repairs, though those matter. I mean the fact that it's here, that someone is behind the counter, that the coffee is on and the light is on and the door is open. I kept the books you'll find in the filing cabinet and behind the register. I wrote it all down because I wanted someone to know what this place meant, even if that someone turned out to be nobody. But I hoped it would be you. Margaret stopped reading. Her chest was tight. I know about Howard. She read the line again. I know about Howard. I've known for a long time. You think you hid it well, but a father sees what a father sees. He's not a bad man, Margaret. He's just a man who measures everything in dollars and thinks that's the same as value. Someday you'll see the difference. I hope it doesn't cost you too much to learn it. This station is yours, not because it's worth money, but because you're the only person I trust to understand what it was for. Don't sell it. Don't let anyone tell you it's worthless. And if you can keep the coffee on, that matters more than you think. The letter was signed with just his name, Walter. Margaret folded the paper carefully, slid it back into the envelope, set it on the counter beside Walter's reading glasses, and the unfinished crossword, 3 objects from a man who had been gone for over a decade, and yet the station felt more full of him now than it had when she walked through the door. Walter had known for years, possibly for decades. He had watched her marriage from a distance, and he had known what was happening, and he had said nothing because he had been waiting for her to come home. Margaret put her hand over her mouth. She thought about all the phone calls she had made to him in those last years, the way she had told him she was fine, the way he had asked anyway, the way he had said, "The door is open every single time," and she had thought it was just something old men said to their grown daughters because they didn't know what else to say. It wasn't. He had meant it. Literally. The door was open for 3 years, and she had not walked through it. The phone rang. Margaret startled. She had forgotten she still had a cell phone, much less that anyone might be calling it. The screen was lit up on the counter beside the lockbox. Howard Caldwell. She stared at it. 3 rings, 4. She picked up. Margaret, Howard's voice, but not the voice she knew, not the voice from the courtroom that wasn't there, not the voice that had said, "You'll be fine, you always are." This voice was different, tight, lower, strained. "Margaret, I need to tell you something." She didn't say anything. "There's something you don't know about your father, about the station, about me." Her breath caught. "Howard, what are you talking about?" "I don't have a lot of time. Vivian thinks I'm on a call with the office. Please, just listen." 20 years ago, a voice cut him off. A woman's voice, sharp, close to the phone. "Howard, who are you talking to?" A muffled scrape, like the phone changing hands. A second of silence, and then a different voice was in Margaret's ear, younger, cooler. The voice of a woman who had recently learned how much power she had and was still enjoying it. "Margaret, this is Vivian." Margaret closed her eyes. "Howard isn't going to be calling you anymore. He doesn't owe you anything. He doesn't owe your dead father anything. We have a lawyer drafting a motion to revisit the asset division because that property of yours is sitting on land that's about to be very valuable, and we both know it." Margaret didn't speak. "Take the buyout when we offer it. Don't make this ugly." Click, the line went dead. Margaret stood behind the counter with the phone still pressed to her ear. Her hands were shaking. She was not thinking about the buyout. She was not thinking about the motion. She was thinking about Howard's voice, the first voice, the voice she had not heard in years, the voice from before everything broke. He had been trying to tell her something about Walter, about the station, about himself, and Vivian had stopped him. Margaret set the phone down on the counter, sat down on the floor behind the counter, exactly where she had sat the night before with the journal, and said out loud to nobody, to the empty station, to her dead father, to the woman she used to be, it was never him. She meant Howard. She meant the lawsuit. She meant everything. It was never Howard chasing this property. It was Vivian. Howard had been carried along by something newer than himself, something with sharper edges, and somewhere in the middle of being carried, he had picked up the phone and tried to warn her. Margaret looked up at the ceiling. She did not know yet what Howard had been trying to say. She did not know yet that 20 years ago Walter had quietly mortgaged this gas station to save Howard's failing company. She did not know yet that the man who had once been her husband had spent 2 decades carrying a debt he could never repay to a father-in-law who had died before he could thank him. She did not know yet that Vivian had calculated all of this, had counted on Howard's guilt, running out the moment his protector was no longer alive to see him fail. She did not know any of that, not yet, but she would. Right now, she only knew this. The station was hers. The valley was hers. The crossword on the counter, the glasses, the journal, the lockbox, the 8 letters, the ledger of every kindness her father had ever done in secret. All of it, hers, and she was not going to sell it, not for $14,000, not for $14 million. Margaret stood up. She walked to the front door. She turned the latch and pushed it open. The mountain air came in, cold and clean. Above the ridgeline, the first stars were appearing. more stars than she had seen in decades, the kind of stars you only get when the nearest street light is 10 miles away and the nearest neighbor is 2. She looked up and said one more thing out loud because there was no one to hear her and because some things have to be said out loud before they become real. "I'm home, Daddy." The sign above the door was still dark, but not for long. 3 weeks later, the sign was lit. Not bright, not new, but lit. Walter's hand-painted letters glowed weak and yellow against the dusk, and Margaret Hayes stood in the doorway with a fresh pot of coffee in her hand and watched it like a woman watching her child take a first breath. The porch railing was new. Bud had built it from pine because Walter would have used cedar, and Walter wasn't here to do it anymore. The cracked front window had been replaced. The kudzu was gone from the south wall, pulled out by hand over 4 afternoons. Margaret's palms had blistered and then calloused and then stopped hurting altogether. Inside the floor was clean. The counter was clean. The shelves behind the register held road maps and snack bags and small bottles of motor oil. The cash register still didn't take credit cards. Nobody seemed to mind. In the bay, Toby Reed was finishing up an alternator job on a Chevy half-ton that belonged to a woman named Patty, who'd driven 30 miles to bring it here. The hydraulic lift hissed. The compressor hummed. The air smelled like grease and pine and coffee. The pumps worked. Margaret had signed a contract with a fuel distributor named Grady, a man who'd once been a young trucker. Walter helped during a slow year. Grady had sent a crew. The crew had inspected the tanks and flushed the lines and installed 2 new pump heads. The contract terms were aggressive. Margaret would not be able to keep up if the cars stopped coming. But the cars were coming. Not a lot. Enough. People who lived in the valley and remembered the station when it was Walter's. They came for gas and stayed for the porch. They drank Margaret's coffee. They asked her about her father. They told her stories she had never heard, stories that made her sit down, stories that made her press her hand to her chest and not be able to speak. A man named Earl Suggs drove 45 minutes each way to get his oil changed by Toby because Earl said Walter had once fixed his daughter's car for free when she was 8 months pregnant and broke down in a snowstorm. Earl was 68 years old. His daughter was now 41. The favor had aged into a debt that had aged into a habit that had aged into a kind of love. These were the customers. This was the rhythm. Margaret woke at 5:30, made coffee, opened the front door at 6, sat on the porch and watched the first light come over the eastern ridge. Toby came down the stairs from the spare room at 6:15. They drank coffee together. They did not say much. They did not need to. At 7, the first car pulled in. By 10, the porch had 2 regulars on it. Sitting in lawn chairs, they kept folded against the side wall of the station between visits. By noon, Bud showed up. By 2, somebody had brought a casserole. By 6, the sun was dropping behind the western ridge and Margaret was lighting the sign. This is how a life rebuilds, not in a single moment, not in a dramatic decision, in the slow accumulation of small mornings, in the way a stranger learns your name, in the way you start humming again without noticing you stopped. Margaret was humming when it happened. She was in the stock room stacking quart bottles of motor oil onto the bottom shelf. She heard Toby's footsteps stop. She heard a metal drawer slide. She heard nothing for a long time. Then she heard him sit down, not on a stool, not on a milk crate, on the floor. Margaret set the oil down, wiped her hands on a rag, walked into the bay. Toby was on the concrete, his back against the green metal filing cabinet, a folder open in his lap. He was staring at a single sheet of paper. His face was wet. He hadn't made a sound. "Toby!" He didn't look up. "Toby, what is it?" He held out the folder. She took it from him, sat down on the milk crate, read the label on the tab. Read. Inside one page, Walter's careful block letters. Clara Reed. Heart valve replacement. $3,200. August 1994. Sent through the doctor's office as anonymous donation. Do not let her know where it came from. Margaret felt the air leave her lungs. She looked at Toby. "That's my grandmother," he said. His voice was barely there. "That was my grandmother." "Toby, she had heart surgery when I was a baby. I don't remember it. My mom told me. She always said somebody paid for it. Anonymous. We never knew who. My grandmother looked. For years, she'd go to church. She'd go to the doctor's office. She'd ask. She'd say, 'Please, I just want to thank the person.' They wouldn't tell her. They'd promised." He pulled in a breath. "She died not knowing." Margaret put her hand on his shoulder. He flinched, then leaned into it. "She told me that story every time I visited. Every time. She said whoever paid for that surgery was the reason our whole family existed. She said when she went to heaven, she was going to find out who it was, and she was going to thank them properly, because she couldn't do it down here." "Toby, she lived in Boone. She never came up here. She didn't know Walter. Walter didn't know her. Walter didn't know me. Walter never met any of us." Margaret looked at the page in her hands. The dollar amount, $3,200. Walter's annual income from the station in 1994 had been somewhere around $26,000. She knew this because she had filed his taxes for him when she was younger. $3,200 had been more than a month of his earnings. He had sent it anonymously, through a doctor's office, to a woman he had never met, so that a baby boy he would never know would have a grandmother. "Toby," Margaret said, "look at me." He looked up. His eyes were red. "The reason you're alive, the reason your family exists, is because a man running a gas station on a road nobody uses decided to pay for a stranger's surgery. Do you understand what that means?" He nodded slowly. "It means I'm supposed to be here," he said. "It means you are here," Margaret said. He sat on the floor for a long time. She sat on the milk crate. The compressor cycled on, cycled off. Outside, a car door slammed. Somebody called Margaret's name from the front of the station. She didn't move. Eventually, Toby stood up, wiped his face on his sleeve, put the folder back in the cabinet, slid the drawer shut, locked it, and went back to work. He stayed late that night, cleaned every single one of Walter's tools, put each one back on the pegboard in its outlined shape. He did not say another word about Clara, but he held that ratchet differently when he picked it up, like it was someone's hand. Margaret saw it. She did not say anything. Some things you don't say. The Range Rover pulled in on a Tuesday. White, spotless. The kind of car that did not belong on Route 11 and knew it. Margaret was at the counter ringing up a 6-pack of motor oil for a man named Otis. She heard the engine before she saw the car. She knew that engine. She'd heard it in her own driveway for 9 years. Howard's Range Rover. Except it wasn't Howard who got out. Margaret froze. Otis paid in cash, said thank you, ma'am, walked out the door, tipped his cap at the woman approaching the porch. The woman did not tip back. She walked up the steps in heels that should have been impossible on gravel. White silk blouse, camel-colored slacks that had never seen a wrinkle, sunglasses she did not take off until she was inside the station, auburn hair pulled back so tight It pulled the corners of her eyes. Vivian Caldwell, 35 years old. Worth Margaret had to admit every dollar she had been paid to break up a marriage. Margaret, Vivian, you and I should talk. Should we? Yes. Vivian set a leather portfolio on the counter, sat down on the stool, crossed her legs, looked around the station like a woman pricing a hotel room she was not going to stay in. You've done a lot of work here, she said. It's almost cute. Margaret said nothing. I'm going to be direct, Margaret. Howard and I would like to make you an offer. Howard isn't here. Howard is at the office. Is he? Vivian smiled. The smile had no eyes in it. He is. She opened the portfolio, slid a single sheet of paper across the counter. Margaret didn't look at it. $180,000, Vivian said, for the property, as is, cash. We can close in 2 weeks, 12 times the appraisal your own divorce settlement listed. You walk away with more money than you've ever had in your name. Margaret didn't look at the paper. She looked at Vivian. Why? Vivian's smile did not move. Because I'm being generous. No. Excuse me. You're not being generous. You're being scared. Vivian's smile flickered for the first time, just for a second. Then it came back. Margaret, let me explain something to you. The state is widening Route 11. The expansion will pass within 1 mile of this property. The land value is going to multiply by a factor I'd rather not say out loud. I have done the research. You have not. I am offering you 12 times what this place is worth on paper. You should be writing me a thank you card. Margaret stood very still behind the counter. She thought about saying no. She thought about saying yes. She thought about throwing Vivian out by her auburn hair. She thought about her father. She thought about what Walter would do. Walter would have poured the woman a cup of coffee. Margaret poured Vivian a cup of coffee, slid it across the counter. Vivian did not touch it. The answer is no, Margaret said. I'm not selling. Margaret, no, you don't have the money to fight this in court. I'm not in court. You will be. Margaret didn't blink. Vivian leaned forward, and then she did the thing Margaret would replay later, the thing that would lodge somewhere in her chest, like a splinter she couldn't reach. She leaned forward and lowered her voice and said, You know why he stayed with you for 33 years, Margaret? Margaret didn't answer. He didn't love you. Stop. He was scared of your father. Stop. He was terrified of disappointing the old man. Walter Hayes scared the hell out of Howard. 20 years ago, Howard was 24 hours from bankruptcy, and Walter was the only thing standing between him and the bottom. Howard never got over it. He kept you because he couldn't face Walter. He stayed in your marriage out of guilt, out of debt, out of fear. Margaret's hands were on the counter. She could not feel them. And then your father died, and the only thing keeping Howard tied to you died with him. He waited a respectful number of years, out of habit, out of pity, and then he found someone he actually loved. Vivian smiled. The smile reached her eyes this time. It was the only true smile she had given. He found me. The station was silent. The compressor wasn't cycling. The clock on the wall wasn't ticking. The cars on Route 11 had stopped passing. Margaret heard her own breath. In, out. She heard faraway Toby drop a wrench in the bay and pick it up again. She thought, this woman is trying to hurt me. She thought, she is succeeding. She thought, do not let her see it. Vivian, Margaret said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. Get out of my father's gas station. Vivian closed the portfolio, picked up the untouched coffee cup, set it carefully back down, stood up. You'll change your mind. I won't. You will. because we will not stop, and Howard is not going to save you. Howard does what I tell him. She walked to the door, stopped, turned. Oh, and Margaret, about that father of yours. You should ask Howard sometime about the night Walter signed a mortgage on this property, the night he saved Howard's company. You think your daddy was a saint? You don't even know the half of it. She walked out, got in the Range Rover, drove away. Margaret stood behind the counter for a long time. Her hands were trembling. She could see them shaking and could not stop them. She put both hands flat on the counter, pressed down, steady. Toby was in the doorway of the bay. He didn't say anything. She didn't either. He went back to work. Bud came that afternoon. He always came on Tuesdays. He had a bag of corn from his garden. Late corn, the last of the season. The husks were dried and crisp. He set the bag on the counter, studied Margaret's face, said one word, Vivian. She nodded. Bud sat down on the stool, took off his cap, set it on the counter beside the corn. Maggie. It was the first time he had called her Maggie. Not Margaret, not Walter's girl. Maggie. There's something I gotta tell you, and I should have told you weeks ago, and I didn't because I'm an old man who's bad at hard conversations, but I gotta tell you now. She waited. You remember the year Howard's company almost went under, 2004. He didn't tell me much. He didn't tell you anything. No. Well, here's what happened. Howard was in over his head, bought a piece of land in Roanoke County for a development that didn't sell. He'd taken out 2 loans against the equity in your house to buy that land. The bank was about to call both loans. If they did, Howard loses the land, loses the house, loses the company, loses everything. Margaret stared at him. I didn't know, she said. Course you didn't. He'd never have let you know, but he was desperate, and he made a phone call he hated making. To Walter, Bud nodded. Howard drove up here on a Sunday afternoon. He sat right where you're standing. Your daddy poured him a cup of coffee. They talked for 2 hours. Howard cried. Howard! Howard! I saw him leaving. His face was something. He was not a man who cried in front of people. What did Walter do? Bud looked at her steadily. Your daddy drove to the county clerk's office the next morning. He took out a mortgage on the station, $85,000. He wired it into Howard's company account that afternoon. It was enough to keep the bank from calling the loans, enough to give Howard breathing room, enough to save the house, save you. Margaret could not speak. Walter paid that mortgage off over the next 7 years, out of station earnings. He was 68 years old. He worked 12-hour days to make that payment. He never said one word to you about it. He never said one word to anyone about it. Howard paid him back. Eventually, took 5 years, but Walter wouldn't take interest. Said the price of admission was that Howard had to treat his daughter right. He did this. He did this. For Howard. For you. He did it for you. He didn't care a damn about Howard. He did it so you wouldn't lose your house and your life and your daughter's stability and everything you'd work for. He did it because that's what he did. He did it because that's who he was. Margaret's hand was over her mouth. She walked behind the counter and sank down to the floor, the same place she had been the night the journal opened her up, the same place Vivian's voice had left her 3 hours ago. The floor was becoming a place she sat. Bud watched her from the stool. There's more, he said quietly. What more? Howard knows. Howard has always known. That's the part you have to understand. For 20 years he has known what Walter did, and every time he looked at you, he saw the man who saved him, and every time he looked at your father, he saw the man he could never be. Margaret closed her eyes. Walter scared him, Bud said. Not the way Vivian put it. Not because Howard was afraid of a man, because Howard was afraid of a standard. Walter was the standard, and Howard knew he wasn't living up to it. Not at home, not with you, not in any of the ways that count. Why didn't he tell me? Because he was ashamed. Why didn't Walter tell me? Because he didn't want you to feel like a debt. Margaret cried then. Not the way she'd cried the night with the journal. Not loud, not childlike, quietly, for her father, for her husband. For 33 years she had not understood. Bud didn't move. He let her cry. When she stopped, he said, Walter loved you, Maggie. I know. In a way you didn't know about. He loved you in ways you're still finding out about. I'm finding out. Howard loved you too, in the only way he could, which is a smaller way, but it was real. I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything with it today. She wiped her face. He poured her a cup of coffee from the pot, slid it across the counter to where she was sitting on the floor. She drank it on the floor. The phone rang. Not the station phone. Margaret had not installed a landline. Her cell phone. Merritt, her daughter. Margaret had not spoken to Merritt in 8 days. She wiped her eyes again, stood up, walked outside onto the porch where the reception was better, sat down in the lawn chair Earl Suggs had left. She answered, Mom. Hi, sweetheart. Mom, I need you to listen to me. I'm listening. Dad and Vivian came to my house last night. Margaret closed her eyes. Mom, they showed me pictures of the station. Mom, you're living in a place that should be condemned. You hired a stranger. You're working a gas pump. You're 58 years old. Merritt, Vivian says she came to see you and offered you a buyout, a real one, more money than I will ever make in 5 years, and you turned it down. Yes. Why? Merritt, I cannot have this conversation right now. You have to have it now. Mom, Dad is going to court. He has to, because you're being unreasonable. Vivian says it's not personal. She says she's trying to help you. She says, Merritt. What? Vivian is not trying to help me. Mom, she's... Merritt, stop. Just for a second. Stop. There was silence. Margaret pressed her fingers against the bridge of her nose. Sweetheart, your father did not come to your house last night because he was worried about me. He came because Vivian needed you on her side, because if she has you, she has him, because Howard cannot stand up to Vivian without you. That's not fair. It might be true. Mom, you've never liked her. I've met her twice. You've never given her a chance. She came here yesterday. I know. You know. She told me. What did she tell you? She said you were emotional. She said you were rude. She said she tried to be reasonable and you wouldn't even look at her offer. Merritt, Mom, she told me your father stayed with me for 33 years out of guilt. There was a pause, a long pause. She didn't say that? She said that. Mom, she said your father didn't love me, that he was scared of your grandfather, that his whole marriage to me was a debt he was repaying. Silence. Mom, I am telling you what she said. She wouldn't say that. Merritt? Mom, you don't have a good track record with this. You've been hurt. You see her as the bad guy. You're not thinking clearly. Margaret looked out at the mountain. The sun was a low gold line above the western ridge. She thought about how much she loved her daughter. She thought about how much of her daughter she had handed to her husband day by day, year by year, by always letting him have the answers. She thought about how it was going to feel to lose this conversation. She thought about how she was going to lose it anyway. Merritt? What? When you're ready to come up here, the coffee will be on. Mom, I love you. Margaret hung up. She sat in the lawn chair with the phone in her lap. Bud was inside. Toby was inside. The mountain was very still. She did not cry. She had cried enough today. She put the phone in her pocket, stood up, walked back inside. Bud looked at her. She did not have to explain. He handed her another cup of coffee. The car was a blue Honda Civic. It pulled in 3 days later, Wednesday afternoon, around 4. The light was getting low. Margaret was on the porch with Bud and Earl Suggs and a regular named Janelle who liked to do crossword puzzles at the station because she said the cell signal at her house was too good and she got too many calls. The Civic was clean but old. The plate said North Carolina. The driver sat in the car for a long time before getting out. Margaret noticed. People who sat in their cars for a long time before getting out usually had something to say that was hard to say. The driver was a young woman, 28 maybe, dark hair pulled back, black scrubs under a tan jacket. She had the look of someone coming off a night shift. She walked to the porch, stopped at the bottom of the steps. "Are you Margaret Hayes?" "I am." "Walter Hayes was your father." Margaret felt the air change. "Yes." The young woman's eyes filled. She did not let the tears fall. "My name is Delphine Doyle. I drove up from Asheville. I didn't call because I didn't know what to say on the phone. Could I sit down?" Margaret got out of her chair. "Come up. Bud, will you pour her a coffee?" "On it." Delphine sat down on the porch, folded her hands in her lap. She was the kind of young woman who had been taught to make herself small in public spaces. Margaret could see it in the way she held her shoulders. "I'm a nurse," Delphine said, "at Mission Hospital, pediatric ICU." "That's a hard floor." "It is. My mother was a nurse." "I didn't know that." "She was. She passed in 2006. Delphine nodded. She took the coffee from Bud, held it in both hands. She did not drink. "Ma'am, I don't know how to start this." "Start anywhere." "My parents died when I was 8. Car accident on I-26. I went into foster care. I bounced around for 10 years, 6 different homes. I aged out at 18. Margaret nodded slowly. "When I was a senior in high school, I got a letter from a lawyer in Lexington, Virginia. The lawyer said that a trust fund had been set up in my name years earlier by a man who wanted to remain anonymous. The trust would pay my full college tuition, room and board, books, living expenses, through a bachelor's degree, up to 10 years of disbursement." She paused. "It changed my life. I'd been working 2 jobs since I was 15. I was going to community college, maybe, if I could afford it, maybe nursing school after that, if I got lucky, if I didn't burn out, if I didn't get pregnant, if I didn't lose hope." "Delphine, I went to UNC Asheville. I got my BSN. I graduated in 2018. I work in pediatrics. I have a job I love. I'm engaged to a man who treats me well. I have a life because of that trust fund." Margaret was still standing. She sat down. "I tried to find out who set it up. The lawyer wouldn't tell me. He said the donor had specified anonymity. He said I should just be grateful and live my life and pass it on someday. And I let it go for 10 years. Then last month, the lawyer who managed my account called me. He said he was retiring. He said he had a folder he'd been keeping for me. He said the donor had passed away years ago, and there was no longer anyone to enforce the anonymity clause. He said if I wanted to know, I could come see him." "You went." "I went. And the donor was Walter Hayes." Margaret closed her eyes. "He set up the trust in 2010. He had heard about me from a social worker friend in Lexington. He had heard about a little girl who had lost everything. He didn't know me. He never met me. He set aside money he didn't have for a child he would never know. Delphine, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to come here like this. I didn't know what else to do. I read his obituary. I drove past this station 3 times before I had the courage to stop. I needed to say thank you to someone, and the only person left to say it to is you. Delphine cried. She tried not to. She was a nurse. She was used to keeping her face still. She cried anyway. Margaret reached out and took her hand. He would have liked you, Margaret said. You think? I know. He saved my life. He saved it twice. Once when he set up the trust. Once when he made it possible for me to become someone. That sounds like him. He never met me. He never met you. How is that possible? He thought it was the most natural thing in the world. Delphine cried quietly into her coffee. Bud got up and went inside. Janelle put down her crossword and rubbed Delphine's shoulder. Earl Suggs took off his cap. Margaret watched the young woman and watched the mountain and watched the porch she had not believed she would ever live on, and understood something. She had been alone 2 months ago. She was not alone now. She had a porch full of strangers who were not strangers. She had a young man in the bay who would not have existed without her father. She had a young woman on her porch who would not be alive without her father. She had a friend named Bud who was not going to let her face anything alone. She did not have her daughter. She did not have her marriage. She did not have her old life. She had this. Maybe this was enough. Maybe this was more than enough. Maybe this was by some measure. She had not yet learned how to use the only kind of wealth that mattered. Delphine stayed for 2 hours. She told Margaret about her work, about her fiancé, about the little girl she'd taken care of the week before who had survived a transplant nobody thought she'd survive. She told Margaret she wanted to come back. She wanted to help. She wanted to do something. She didn't know what. Margaret told her, you don't have to do anything. You being alive is the thing. But Delphine said, please, let me help. Let me be useful the way he was. So Margaret let her. Delphine said she would come up on weekends. She would work the counter. She would make coffee. She would write thank you notes to the people who left casseroles. She would do whatever Margaret needed. Margaret said, you don't owe me anything. Delphine said I owe him everything. Margaret said, then come on Saturday. Delphine came on Saturday. She would come every Saturday after that. The gray sedan pulled in the following Tuesday. Margaret was at the counter. The station was quiet. Toby was in the bay. Bud had gone home an hour ago. The woman who got out of the sedan was in her late 60s. Tall, straight back, silver hair cut sharp at the jaw, reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She was carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it had seen every courtroom in Virginia. She walked up the porch steps, stopped in the doorway, looked at Margaret. You're Walter Hayes's daughter. I am. My name is Eleanor Vance. I retired from the law 5 years ago. Before that, I practiced in Richmond for 31 years. Family law, estates, probate. All right. I heard from a man named Bud Whitaker last week. He said you were going to be sued by your ex-husband. He said you didn't have a lawyer. He said you couldn't afford one. Margaret didn't say anything. Eleanor walked to the counter, set down the briefcase, looked Margaret in the eye. In 1991, my daughter Anna was 7 years old. She had a hole in her heart. She needed surgery. The insurance wouldn't cover it. My husband had just left me. I was working as a paralegal because I hadn't finished my law degree yet. I lived an hour from here. I came up Route 11 one Saturday for reasons I no longer remember. My car broke down outside the station. Margaret was very still. Your father fixed the car. We got to talking. I told him my situation. I should not have. I was a private woman. I did not unburden myself to strangers. But there was something about him. He listened. Yes. 3 weeks later, an envelope arrived at my apartment. No return address. Inside a cashier's check for $3,200, the exact amount of Anna's surgery. There was a note. The note said only this: your daughter deserves a chance. Use it well. Eleanor's eyes did not waver. They did not water. She had told this story before, to herself, many times, across many years. I knew it was him. I drove up here a month after Anna's surgery. I tried to thank him. He refused to admit it was him. He said he had no idea what I was talking about. He gave me a cup of coffee and told me to drive safe, and never spoke of it again. Eleanor, I went on to finish law school. I built a practice. I raised my daughter. She is alive. She has children of her own. She is alive because of a man who would not admit he had saved her. Eleanor opened her briefcase, took out a single legal pad, set it on the counter. Bud told me you have a hearing coming up. He told me your ex-husband is filing a motion to revisit the asset division. He told me the woman behind it is named Vivian. He told me you don't have a lawyer. I don't. You do now. Eleanor, I can't afford. You will not pay me. I will not accept payment. This bill was settled in 1991. I have been waiting 33 years to pay it back. Your father would not let me thank him while he was alive, so I'm going to thank him by making sure his daughter does not lose his gas station to a woman in heels. Margaret felt her throat close. She did not speak. She nodded. Eleanor picked up her pen. Now, tell me everything, from the beginning, the divorce, the settlement, the property history, every word that woman said to you, every word your ex-husband said, every detail you can remember. I want all of it. I want it in order. I want it slow. Where do I start? Start with the courtroom in Roanoke, the day you walked out with a cardboard box. So Margaret started, and Eleanor wrote. And outside the station, the sun dropped behind the western ridge, and the sign came on weak and yellow against the dusk, and Toby came in from the bay and started a fresh pot of coffee, and the regulars on the porch folded their chairs and went home, and Bud's truck rolled in late carrying a load of firewood, and Delphine called from Asheville to say she had bought a sleeping bag for the spare apartment because she wanted to be ready for Saturday. Margaret talked for 2 hours. Eleanor wrote 3 legal pads worth of notes. When they were done, Eleanor closed her briefcase. She looked at Margaret. This will not be easy. I know. That woman has money. She has lawyers. She has time. I know. You have something better. What? Eleanor looked around the station, at the counter, at Walter's glasses, at the unfinished crossword, at the porch, at the bay where Toby was wiping down a wrench, at the road outside. You have a father who spent 40 years building an army you didn't know existed, and every soldier in it is showing up on time. Margaret looked at her. Eleanor smiled for the first time, a small, real smile. They have a battlefield, she said. We have a community. Margaret walked her to the car. The mountain was quiet. The first stars were out. Eleanor opened the driver's side door, paused. Margaret, yes. He talked about you. Walter, in 1991, the day my car broke down, he talked about you for a long time. He said his daughter was the smartest person he'd ever known. He said she was going to do something with her life. He said she just hadn't decided what yet. That was a long time ago. It was. I'm 58. Yes, it's late. Margaret, yes, It's not late, it's exactly on time. Eleanor got in her car, drove away. Margaret stood in this parking lot until the taillights disappeared around the curve. Then she walked back to the station. She did not go inside. She sat on the porch, picked up the crossword puzzle she had been carrying around in her pocket for days, the unfinished one, 28 across, still blank, 4 letters. The first letter was H. She looked at the clue, a place that waits. She stared at it for a long time. She did not write anything yet. She wasn't ready. But she was getting closer. She set the crossword on the porch railing, folded it carefully, watched the stars come out over the eastern ridge one at a time, like an audience taking their seats for something that was about to begin. Inside the station, Toby turned off the bay lights. The sign above the door glowed yellow. The coffee was on. The door was open. And, somewhere down the mountain, Vivian Caldwell was on the phone with a lawyer named Felton, telling him to file the motion first thing in the morning, to make it ugly, to make Margaret Hayes choose between her father's legacy and her own bank account. Vivian did not know about Eleanor Vance. Vivian did not know about Delphine Doyle. Vivian did not know about Toby Reed. Vivian did not know about Bud Whitaker, or the casseroles, or the firewood, or the 40 years of small kindnesses that were about to come due all at once. Vivian knew about money, about contracts, about the leverage of a woman with a husband on a leash. She did not know about communities. She was about to find out. Margaret picked up the crossword again, held it up to the porch light. 28 across. She still didn't write the answer, but she folded it carefully and put it back in her pocket and smiled just a little to no one, the way her father used to smile when he knew something somebody else didn't. The night before court, Margaret could not sleep. She gave up at 3 in the morning, got up, made coffee, sat behind the counter where she had sat the first night she found the journal, pulled the crossword puzzle out of her pocket, the one she'd been carrying around for weeks. 28 across, 4 letters. The first letter was H, the clue, a place that waits. She picked up her father's pen, the same pen Walter had used to fill in 27 across. She held it over the blank squares. Her hand did not shake. H-O-M-E. She wrote the letters slowly, one at a time, the way Walter had written every entry in every journal he had ever kept. She set the pen down, set the puzzle down beside his reading glasses, looked at it for a long time. Then she went upstairs and slept for 2 hours. When she came back down at sunrise, Eleanor Vance was already in the parking lot in her gray sedan, working through a thermos of coffee in a navy suit pressed sharp enough to cut paper. Bud's truck was parked beside hers. Toby was on the porch. Delphine had driven up from Asheville at midnight and was inside making breakfast. They had all come, without being asked. Margaret stood in the doorway of her father's gas station at 6:30 in the morning. The mountain was still purple. The sign above the door was still on from the night before. She did not know what was going to happen in the courthouse in 3 hours. She knew this. She was not walking in alone. The drive to the courthouse took 1 hour and 10 minutes. Eleanor drove. Margaret sat in the passenger seat with her father's deed in a folder on her lap. Bud followed in his Chevy. Delphine and Toby stayed at the station because somebody had to keep it open, because Walter would not have closed the station for a court date, and because Margaret was not going to be the one who closed it now. Eleanor did not talk much on the drive. She had said everything she needed to say the night before. She had walked Margaret through the documents 3 times. She had explained the chain of title, the separate property doctrine, the standard of proof Vivian's team would need to meet, the standard they would not meet. She had been a lawyer for 31 years. She had not lost a case like this. But Eleanor did say one thing as they came over the last ridge before the county seat. "Margaret." "Yes." "Whatever happens in there, you walk out of that room with your head up. Do you understand?" "I understand." "You do not let her see you flinch." "I won't." "And if your husband is in there, you do not look at him as if he can hurt you. He cannot hurt you anymore. He had 33 years to do that. He used them. He's empty now." "All right. You are not." Margaret looked at her. "You are not empty, Margaret. That woman wants you to believe you are. You are not." The courthouse parking lot was half full. Eleanor parked in a visitor spot. Bud parked beside her. They got out together. Margaret straightened her blouse, tucked her hair behind her ears, took the folder, walked up the steps. The hearing was in courtroom 3. Margaret had been in courtroom 1 for her divorce. Courtroom 1 had been bigger, cleaner. The judge in courtroom 1 had sounded like he was speaking from inside a tin can. Courtroom 3 was smaller, older. The pews creaked, the fluorescent lights buzzed. There was no microphone. Howard was already there. He was sitting in the front row. He was alone. Margaret stopped at the back of the room. Eleanor put a hand on her elbow. "Margaret, I see him. Where is Vivian?" "I don't know." Bud leaned over. "Maggie, look at him." Margaret looked. Howard was sitting very still. His back was straight. His hands were folded on his knee. He was wearing a charcoal suit, the same charcoal suit he had worn to her father's funeral 12 years ago. She knew because she remembered the lapel. There was a thread coming loose on the left lapel. She had meant to fix it. She had never fixed it. He was wearing it today. He looked old. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had not slept and did not particularly want to be there. Vivian was not in the room. Felton was at the plaintiff's table. Charcoal suit, same one, same wristwatch. He was on his phone the way he had been on his phone in courtroom 1 9 weeks ago. He did not look up when Margaret walked past. Eleanor and Margaret took the defense table. Bud sat in the second pew, took off his cap, set it on the bench beside him. Margaret did not look at Howard. She did not have to. She could feel him not looking at her. The judge came in. Everyone stood. The judge sat down. Everyone sat. "This is the matter of Caldwell versus Hayes. Motion to reopen settlement. Are counsel ready?" "Plaintiff is ready, Your Honor," Felton said. "Defense is ready, Your Honor," Eleanor said. "Plaintiff, proceed." Felton stood up, adjusted his tie, cleared his throat. He began to speak. Margaret did not listen to Felton's words. She watched Howard. Howard was still sitting very still. His hands were no longer folded on his knee. They were gripping the edge of the pew, white-knuckled, the way a man grips a pew when he is afraid he might stand up before he means to. Felton talked about the highway expansion. He talked about appraisal valuation. He talked about fraud and disclosure. He talked about equitable distribution. Eleanor listened with her pen on her legal pad and did not write anything down. After 11 minutes, Felton sat down. The judge looked at Eleanor. "Defense!" Eleanor stood up. She walked to the center of the room. She had the deed in one hand and Walter's will in the other. "Your Honor, this is a brief matter. The property at issue is documented as separate non-marital property of the defendant. It was inherited by Margaret Hayes from her father Walter Hayes in 2012, 8 years prior to any divorce proceeding. The chain of title is unbroken. The property has never been jointly held. It has never been improved by marital funds. It has never been, Your Honor." The voice came from the front row. "Howard." Howard had stood up. The judge looked at him. Felton looked at him. Everyone in the room looked at him. Howard was on his feet in his old charcoal suit with the loose thread on the left lapel, and his face was the color of paper, and his hands were no longer gripping the pew because the pew had let go of him. "Your Honor, I would like to withdraw the motion," Felton said. Howard did not turn. "I would like to withdraw the motion, effective immediately, with prejudice. I will pay all court costs. I will pay the defendant's legal fees. I will sign whatever waiver is necessary." The judge looked at Felton. Felton looked at Howard. Felton said, "Mr. Caldwell, are you sure?" "I'm sure." "This is highly irregular." "I am aware of that." The judge took a long breath. He set his pen down. He looked at Howard for a long time. Then he looked at Eleanor. Eleanor did not move. The judge said, "Motion is withdrawn, with prejudice. The matter is closed." The gavel came down. Margaret did not breathe. Howard sat back down. He did not look at her. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. For 10 seconds, the courtroom was silent. Then Felton stood up and walked out without speaking. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Somebody coughed in the back of the room. A clerk shuffled papers. The judge stood. Everyone stood. The judge walked out. Eleanor turned to Margaret. She did not smile. She just nodded. Once, the way a woman nods when something has been done that needed to be done. Margaret nodded back. She picked up her folder. She picked up her purse. She walked out of the row. Bud was waiting in the aisle. He did not say anything. He just put his hand on the small of her back, walked her out of the room. In the hallway, the sun was coming through the tall windows in long bars of light. The marble floor was cold. Margaret's heels echoed. She got to the front steps of the courthouse before she had to stop. She stopped on the second to last step, held the railing, looked at the parking lot. In the parking lot, Vivian was waiting. She was standing next to Howard's Range Rover, arms crossed. The auburn hair was not as tight today. The white blouse was wrinkled at the collar. The sunglasses were on, but they were not enough to hide what was on her face. Howard came out behind Margaret. Eleanor and Bud stayed back. Eleanor caught Margaret's eye and lifted her chin. Margaret understood. This part she had to do alone. Howard came to the step beside her. He did not touch her. He held out an envelope, a manila envelope, old, soft at the corners, the kind a man kept in a drawer for 20 years. Margaret, she took it. "I had this in a file cabinet at the office. I have kept it there for 2 decades. I never had the courage to give it to you. I should have given it to you a long time ago." She did not open it. She did not need to. She knew what it was. "The mortgage," she said. "Yes." "Walter, yes." 2004, $85,000. He paid it off himself. Over 7 years, I paid him back. He would not take interest. He would not let me thank him. He would not let me write a check directly. He made me bring the money up to the station twice a year in cash in envelopes. He counted it in front of me. He said one thing to me every time. "What?" He said, "Take care of my daughter." Margaret's hand was over her mouth. "He died before I had paid him back in full. I sent the last payment to you in a checking deposit the month after he passed. You never asked where it came from. You assumed it was a tax refund. I let you assume." "Howard," I owed him. I owed him for 20 years, and every year I tried to be the man he was, and every year I failed, and every year I told myself I'd try again, and then he died, and the only person who had ever made me try was gone, and there was no one to see me fail anymore. Howard. Vivian found me at the lowest point I have ever been. She told me I was a self-made man. She told me your father was a small-town mechanic with a hero complex. She told me I had spent 33 years apologizing for a debt that did not exist. She told me I could be free. And you believed her. I wanted to. That's not the same. No, it isn't. He took a breath, looked at the parking lot, looked at Vivian standing next to the Range Rover, looked back at Margaret. I came up here to take the one thing he had left behind. I told myself it was business. I told myself it was about money. I told myself Vivian was right. And then I sat in that courtroom this morning in this suit I wore to his funeral, and I looked at you sitting next to a lawyer he saved, and I realized what? That I have become the man he was always afraid I'd be. And that's not Vivian's fault. That's mine. Margaret was crying. She did not want to be. She had not planned to be. She was. Howard, I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to take me back. I'm not asking you for anything. I'm telling you, the lawsuit is over. The property is yours. Whatever Vivian does next, she does without me. I am not going home with her tonight. He looked at Vivian. Vivian was watching. She had taken off the sunglasses. She did not look 35 anymore. She looked her age and 10 years on top of that. She looked like a woman who had built a marriage on a man's shame and had just been told the shame was no longer for sale. Howard, Margaret said, what are you going to do? I don't know. Where will you go? I don't know. Howard, Margaret, I'm sorry it took you this long to find this in you. Me too. I'm sorry I did not find this in me sooner. Margaret, yes, what you did, coming up here, keeping the station, that was the bravest thing I have ever seen a person do. Margaret could not speak. He nodded once. He turned. He walked down the steps. He walked past Vivian without stopping. He did not look at her. He kept walking, past the Range Rover, past the row of cars, across the parking lot, to a cab that was waiting at the curb. He had ordered it, before the hearing, or during, or after the gavel came down. He got in. The cab pulled away. Vivian started screaming. It was not a polite scream. It was not the controlled fury of a woman who had been told no. It was something older than that, something that had been waiting in her for years, the sound of a woman who had just watched the man she had not loved walk away with the only thing she had ever wanted from him, which was the appearance of devotion. She screamed at the cab. She screamed at the parking lot. She screamed at the courthouse. She did not scream at Margaret. Because Vivian Caldwell did not see Margaret Hayes anymore. Vivian was a woman who had built a strategy around a husband's weakness. The strategy was gone now. The husband had taken his weakness with him. Vivian was alone in a parking lot, in wrinkled silk, without her sunglasses. Margaret watched for a long time. Then she turned and walked back into the courthouse to find Eleanor. The drive back was quiet. Eleanor did not put on the radio. Bud followed behind in the Chevy. The mountain came up to meet them. The October leaves were past peak now, brown and dropping. The road smelled like rain that hadn't started yet. Margaret held the manila envelope in her lap. She did not open it. She knew what was inside. She did not need to read it. She thought about her father. She thought about how he had sat at the counter on a Sunday afternoon in 2004 and listened to a son-in-law he did not love cry, and then had driven to a clerk's office and put his livelihood up as collateral for a man who did not deserve it, because the man's wife was his daughter, and his daughter had not asked for help, and would not have known to ask. She thought about how Walter had paid the mortgage himself, 12-hour days, at 68 years old. She thought about how he had counted Howard's repayments in cash on the counter twice a year and had said the same 6 words every time. Take care of my daughter. Howard had failed. Walter had known he would. Walter had done it anyway. Margaret did not cry on the drive home. She had cried enough. She held the envelope in her lap and watched the mountain and thought about her father and let herself feel what she had not been able to feel for 33 years, which was this. She had been loved, not by Howard, not really, but by Walter, completely and quietly, and from a distance she had never noticed. She had been loved. She just had not been there to receive it. When they pulled into the station parking lot, the porch was full. Delphine had baked something. The whole building smelled like cinnamon. Toby was on the porch with 3 regulars and a man Margaret did not recognize. Earl Suggs was there. Janelle was there with her crossword puzzle. A woman from down the mountain whose name Margaret had not yet learned was there with her 2 grown sons. When Margaret got out of the car, they did not cheer. They did not clap. That was not how things worked up here. They just looked at her and nodded, the way Walter would have nodded, the way mountain people nod when something has gone the right way. Margaret walked up the steps to the porch. Delphine handed her a piece of warm coffee cake. Bud put on the coffee. Eleanor sat down in a lawn chair with her legal pad and started to make a list of things that would need to happen next. Toby went back to the bay because there was an oil change he hadn't finished. The mountain was quiet. The sign came on at 6. The station went back to being a station. Sunday morning came 2 weeks later. Margaret was on the porch with her second cup of coffee when she heard a car coming up the road. It was a rental, compact sedan, out-of-state plates. It pulled into the lot. The doors open. A woman in a blue cardigan got out of the driver's side. A boy 9 years old climbed out of the back, wearing a Nationals cap. A girl 6 years old climbed out behind him, carrying a stuffed rabbit. Margaret set down her coffee. Merritt was crying before she got to the bottom step. The kids did not know what to do. They had been told they were visiting their grandmother. They had not been told their mother was going to cry in the parking lot. The boy looked at Margaret. He was 9 and did not really know her. He had not seen her since he was 4. "Are you Grandma?" "I am. Mom says we're staying for the weekend." "That's right. There's a kid in there." He was pointing at the bay door. Toby was in the doorway drying his hands on a rag. "That's Toby. He's a grown-up. He works here." "Can he show me the lift?" "He can." The boy ran off toward the bay. The girl held her rabbit and looked at Margaret. She did not say anything. Merritt was at the bottom step, wiping her face, trying not to. "Mom?" "Sweetheart, can I come up there?" "Of course you can." Merritt walked up the steps. She stood in front of her mother. Then she put her arms around her. She held on. She held on for a long time. Margaret held her back. The girl with the rabbit watched them, decided this was acceptable, walked into the station to find her brother. When Merritt could speak, she did. "Mom, I'm so sorry." "Sweetheart, I was wrong about everything, about Dad, about Vivian, about you, about this place. I was so wrong, I don't know where to start." "You don't have to start anywhere." "Mom, Dad called me the night of the hearing. He told me what he had done. He told me what Granddad did for us in 2004, for our family. He told me everything. He told me about the mortgage, about the years of payments, about what Vivian said to you in the station that day." "He told you?" "He told me." And then I thought back. Mom, I thought back to every Sunday I ever spent at Granddad's house. Every summer I spent up at the station when I was little. Every time he made me pancakes. Every time he taught me how to check oil. I'd forgotten he taught me that, Mom. I'd forgotten. "Merritt, I told you that you were unreasonable." "Mom, I told you that. I told you that you were unreasonable for keeping the only thing your father ever left you. I am 32 years old, and I told my mother she was unreasonable for honoring her father's memory. Margaret held her daughter's hand. I didn't respect you, Merritt said. There it was, the thing they had been walking around for months. I know, sweetheart. You always agreed. With Dad, with everyone. You always said yes. You always made things easy. And I thought that was weakness. I thought you were small. I thought you let him walk over you because you couldn't stand up for yourself. And I thought I was different. I thought I was strong because I had opinions, because I argued, because I had a career, because I didn't let men tell me what to do. I thought I had escaped the thing I saw in you, Merritt. And then this happened, Mom, and you didn't agree with Dad. For the first time in my whole life, you didn't agree with him. And you came up here, and you didn't sell, and you didn't fold, and I watched you become a person I had never met, and it scared me. Why did it scare you? Because if you were that person all along, then I had been wrong about you my whole life, and if I had been wrong about you, then I had been wrong about a lot of things. Margaret was crying. She was trying not to. She was crying. Mom, I'm sorry I didn't respect you. Merritt. What? You were right not to. Merritt looked at her. You were right not to respect the woman who agreed with everything, because that woman was not me. That woman was somebody I was being, to keep the peace, to not lose anyone, to not be alone, to not be too much, to not be too little, to not be a problem. Mom, I lived 33 years being agreeable. I am 58 years old, and I have lived 2 months not being agreeable, and the not agreeable 2 months are the realest months I have ever had. Mom, I do not blame you for not respecting the agreeable Margaret. I don't respect her either. Mom, what? I don't want my daughter to learn what you learned. I don't want her to think she has to agree. Then teach her she doesn't. I don't know how. You're learning. You're here. That's the start. Merritt cried into her mother's shoulder. In the bay, Toby was lifting the boy up to see the lift. The girl was sitting on a milk crate watching them. The boy was asking questions. Toby was answering every one of them. When Merritt could stand up, Margaret wiped her face and walked her into the bay. The boy was pointing at the pegboard. Toby was telling him what each tool was for. The girl had abandoned her rabbit on the milk crate and was holding a flashlight. Margaret stopped in the doorway. She watched. She watched her grandson on the concrete floor of her father's gas station in a Nationals cap, listening to a young man who was alive because of Walter ask questions about wrenches. She watched her granddaughter aim a flashlight at the underside of a Buick. She watched Toby move the way Walter had moved. She felt for half a second that she was standing on the wrong side of time, that she was the little girl in this picture, that her father was about to come around the corner with 2 cups of coffee, one for him, one for her, the kids one with extra cream, that nothing had happened in the last 50 years, that Howard had not happened, that Vivian had not happened, that the divorce had not happened, that Walter had not died, that she was 8 years old and her father was alive, and the station was open and the porch was full and the sign was on. She blinked. The feeling did not last, but the warmth of it did. Toby looked up. Maggie, your grandkids want to learn how to check tire pressure. Do they? The boy looked at her. Toby says you used to do this when you were little. I did. How old were you when you started? About your age. Were you good at it? I was good at it. Will you teach us? Margaret walked over to the workbench, picked up the tire pressure gauge. It was the same gauge Walter had used, the one with the rubber grip worn smooth from his thumb. She had not held it in over 40 years. It fit her hand the way a thing fits a hand when it has been waiting. She knelt down next to the boy. "What's your name?" "Jack." "And yours?" "Olivia." "Jack, Olivia. This is a tire pressure gauge. You press it on the valve stem, like this." She demonstrated. Jack tried. Pressed too hard. Air hissed out. He looked panicked. "It's all right," Margaret said. "You just lost a little air. We'll put it back. Try again. Softer. Just press the gauge until the number comes out." He tried again. 32. "That's perfect. That's perfect. That's a good tire. You just did your first check." He grinned. The grin was Walter's grin. It was Margaret's grin from 49 years ago. It was the grin a child makes when they have done a small thing they did not know they could do, and a grown-up they trust has just told them they did it right. Margaret looked at Olivia. "Your turn." Olivia took the gauge. She was 6. She was small. She knelt down beside her brother. She pressed the gauge to the valve stem. 31. "Almost perfect. We'll add a little air. Want to learn how?" Yes, so Margaret taught her how. In the bay her father had built with his own hands, on the concrete floor where she had learned the same thing, while her daughter watched from the doorway and cried quietly and did not try to stop. Late November came. The leaves were gone. The mountain was bare. The light was thin. The morning smelled like smoke from somebody's chimney 3 valleys over. The porch had a kerosene heater on it now. The regulars wore flannel and wool. Janelle had moved her crossword puzzles indoors. Earl Suggs had brought a quilt his late wife had made and left it on the back of the rocking chair without explanation. The chair was Margaret's now. Merritt had visited 3 times in 5 weeks. She was talking about moving closer. Howard had moved to a small apartment in Lynchburg. Vivian had filed for divorce. Vivian had also filed a separate suit against Howard for fraud, alleging he had misrepresented his net worth at the time of their marriage. Howard's lawyers said it was nuisance. They would settle. Howard called Margaret once. He did not ask her to forgive him. He asked her if she would let him send Walter's headstone a new vase. The one at the cemetery had cracked. Margaret said yes. Howard sent the vase. The vase arrived at the cemetery the following week. Margaret drove down, set it on her father's grave, put fresh chrysanthemums in it, white ones. Walter had liked white ones. She did not stay long. She did not need to. She drove back to the station the same afternoon and got there in time to ring up a man who had come to buy a quart of antifreeze. Life was like that now, small, useful, on time. On a Friday in mid-November, a few minutes before 5, a minivan pulled into the lot. It was road dusty, cracked tail light. The driver was a young woman, maybe 28, wearing a faded jacket and jeans. 3 children were in the back seat. The youngest was asleep in a car seat. The woman climbed out, looked at the pumps, looked at the station, looked at Margaret on the porch. She had the expression Margaret had seen on other faces and in her own mirror in another life, the face of a woman carrying more than she could say. "Could I get some gas?" "Of course." Margaret walked to the pump, started filling the tank, checked the oil, topped off the windshield fluid, noticed the front left tire was low, added air without asking. When the pump clicked off, the woman opened her purse. Margaret saw her fingers move through receipts and loose change, the quick motion of a woman counting what she had, hoping it was enough. "Pay it next time you're through," Margaret said. The woman looked up. "What?" "Next time you drive through, you can pay then. I can't just—" "Sure you can. Ma'am, I'll be here." The woman stared at her. Her eyes filled. She pressed her lips together, tight. Why? Margaret smiled. Because my father used to say the same thing. The woman could not speak. She nodded. She got in her minivan. She drove away. Margaret watched the minivan disappear around the curve. She stood by the pump for a long time after the tail lights were gone. Then she went back inside. It was dusk. Toby had already locked the bay. Bud's firewood was stacked along the wall, enough for another week. The coffee pot was off. The checkerboard on the porch railing was set up for tomorrow's game. Margaret turned off the lights one by one. The front room, the stock room, the counter lamp. She picked up Walter's reading glasses, cleaned them with the hem of her shirt, set them back beside the crossword. The crossword was finished now. 28 across, 4 letters. Home. She left it that way. She walked to the front door, stopped, turned around, looked at the room she had walked into 9 weeks ago, terrified, broke with a cardboard box and a rusted truck, and nothing left. The room was clean now. The counter was clean, the shelves were stocked, the cash register had $246 in the drawer. The journal was back in the wall behind the panel. The lockbox was back beside it. 8 new letters had been added to the bundle. From Toby's grandmother's family in Boone, finally informed, who had paid for the surgery. From Delphine's adoptive parents, retired and quietly grateful. From 2 more strangers who had heard about the station and wanted to write down what Walter had done for them years ago. The bundle was getting bigger. Margaret was starting a second one. She walked outside, locked the door behind her with the key her father had turned 10,000 times before her. Through the glass, she could see the sign glowing against the darkening sky. Faded, hand-painted, lit. Haze, gas, and service. She climbed into the truck. The Ford, 2006, cracked dashboard, passenger door that stuck. The truck Howard had bought for a landscaper who had quit after 2 weeks. The truck she had driven out of a courtroom in Roanoke 9 weeks ago with $200 in a cardboard box. She put her hand on the steering wheel. She did not start the engine. She just sat there. She thought about her father. She thought about the journal. She thought about Howard in a small apartment in Lynchburg, learning what it was to be alone. She thought about Vivian somewhere south, learning what it was to be left. She thought about Merritt and the grandchildren and the way Jack had grinned when the gauge read 32. She thought about the woman in the minivan who would come back, or wouldn't. It did not matter. The point was that she had said the thing. The point was that the words existed in the world now. The point was that whoever was driving past on Route 11 tonight could see a sign that meant somebody was here, somebody was open, somebody was waiting. The point was that. She started the engine, backed out of the lot, headed up the gravel road behind the station toward the small cabin she had bought the week before, with the money Howard had wired her unprompted the day after the hearing, a check for the back payment on Walter's mortgage with 20 years of interest he had insisted on adding, even though Walter had refused it. Eleanor had handled the transfer. Margaret had used part of it to buy a 4-room cabin with a wood stove and a view of the ridge. She would sleep there tonight. She would wake up tomorrow. She would drive back down to the station. She would unlock the door. She would put the coffee on. She would turn on the sign. 58 years old, married for 33 years to a man who had not seen her, divorced for 2 months from a marriage that had been over for 2 decades, sole owner of a gas station her ex-husband's lawyers had called a teardown. She had nothing. She had everything, and she had not asked permission for any of it. The truck climbed the gravel road. Behind her, the sign at the gas station glowed weak and yellow against the dark. It would still be on when she came back in the morning. It would still be on every morning after, because that was the deal her father had made 46 years ago when he hung that sign on this building on this road. The coffee would be on, the light would be on, the door would be open, and whoever needed to find their way home would be able to. Margaret Hayes had just started over, and this time she had not asked permission